Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Allein, Gott in der Höhe sei which translates to God alone on high be glory. This is a pretty interesting chorale. I found that there was a lot of subdivision going on, and when you look in between the beats of the harmonic rhythm, there are some interesting chords lurking about. Other than that, the chords are fairly straightforward, so we're just going to hop right into the analysis. Starting things off, we have one sharp in the key signature. We start with G, we end with G. I reckon we're in the key of G major. We have some passing tones in the tenor and the melody before we get G, D, G, and B again. No need to reanalyze. Passing seventh in the bass, and then we have E, E, G, and C. That's a C major chord in first inversion. Oh, before we go any further, this is a half cadence in the key of E minor. So we're looking for a point in which we modulate, and I believe that we modulate closer to this part of the phrase here, like right before the cadence. It just feels like it's sprung up on us, almost like one notch below a deceptive cadence, because we would expect a cadence in the key of the tonic, but he switches to E minor relatively quickly. So after our 4-6 chord, this G is a chord tone. We have D, A, F sharp, and D. That's our 5 chord, D major. Passing tone in the tenor, and then we have A, C, E, and C. A bit of transitive harmony here. Typically 2 goes to 5. Here we are seeing it go the other way around. Passing tones in the inner voices, and this gives us A, D, F sharp, and C, which is D7 over A. That's a 5-4-3 chord. And then we get a deceptive progression, I guess a subdivided deceptive progression here, E, E, G, and B, making this a 6 chord, E minor. And I do believe this is where we go to the key of E minor. E minor now is our tonic. Now here's something that's a little bit interesting. We have this passing chord here right after our tonic. We have D, which is a non-chord tone, F sharp, which is a non-chord tone, and B. B is also, B is a chord tone, so we don't have to mark it. But if we look at the aggregate of the three, all of the notes, but because 3 of the voices are moving, I'm looking to see whether or not a subdivision is occurring. And we have D, B, F, and B. Not D sharp, but D natural. And I think that we have a little bit of a passing minor chord here, and I'm not sure if I'm projecting this, and because I have that bias, now I hear it that way, but it really does sound like there is a passing minor dominant chord here. So the fact that it's happening off of the harmonic rhythm and it's happening in passing means that it's a little bit of a gesture and not as bold of a statement like we've seen in some of Bach's minor chorales in the past, but they naturally happen when you use the descending natural minor configuration of the scale, I guess, when it does not have the leading tone. But I'll mark it there. We also see it used later on, so I feel like maybe it is significant. Maybe I'm not just maybe it's not a stretch. But afterwards we get C, C, E, and A. That's A minor in first inversion, which is 4-6, and then we cadence on B major, B, F sharp, D sharp, and B, which is a 5 chord, making this a specific kind of half cadence called a Phrygian half cadence, where we have this half step movement in the bass of flat 6 going down to 5. We see Phrygian half cadences pop up in minor every once in a while. Looking ahead, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of G major, and I think for all intents and purposes the rest of this phrase, or I guess the entirety of the phrase, is in the key of G major. So we have E, G, E, and B, which is typically how half cadences resolve to their tonic. Not always, but a lot of the time they do, and I do think this is our common chord back to the key of G major. E minor also happens to be our sub-mediant in the key of G major. 6 is our in and our out. It's pretty cool when Bach does that. We then have passing tones in the lower voices, and then we have G, B, D, and B. This is a 6-to-1 progression, kind of interesting. We do see them with some frequency though, so I'm not sure how interesting it actually is. But then we have passing tones in the inner voices, and that actually leaves us with G, C, E, and B, which is C major 7 over G, which is 4-4-3. And the reason why I feel like there is a chord here is because it takes us to 5, F sharp, D, F sharp, and A. Depending on how granular you want to be with your analysis. I don't know why, but this chorale felt like it needed to, it felt like it demanded a little bit more granularity as far as the subdivided chord progressions are concerned. Maybe there is an implied chord there, maybe there isn't. Either way, 4 going to 5 is a normative progression. If it is in the texture, why not analyze it? After our 5 chord, we have a passing tone in the melody before we get E, E, G, and C. Another sort of deceptive chord progression in a way. This is C major over E, which is 4, 6. We would expect 5 to go to 1, or 5, yeah, we would expect 5 to go to 1. So when it goes elsewhere, it sort of turns us around and prolongs the resolution. We have a passing tone in the bass, a passing 7th in the melody, and then we get C, E, G, and A. That's A minor 7 over C, which is 2, 6, 5. Typically indicates that there is a cadence coming soon, but this is a little bit earlier than we would expect, so that's kind of interesting. Either way, it does go to some type of 5 chord. We have A, D, F sharp, and A, but I also lump in this C here because I think it makes a little bit more sense in this context for this to be a, well, this A is actually a chord tone. Let me not mark it. Let me mark all of the non-chord tones here. It makes sense for, instead of this to be a 5, 6, 4 chord, which I think is a totally valid analysis, D, F sharp, A, and C, maybe we have a 5, 4, 3 chord because 6, 4 chords typically are seen in passing or in cadential situations, and sometimes we see them in situations where the bass is sustained, where we have the same bass note over a long period of time, or a longer period of time than just one beat. But here 5, 4, 3 feels a little bit more usual, like we see 5, 4, 3 here, 5, 4, 3 here. It's I guess actually it is kind of a byproduct of the fact that we have the same root shared between the two, or the same bass potential bass shared between the 2 and the 5. Maybe I'm reading into it too much, but 5, 6, 4, 5, 4, 3, it's some type of second inversion 5 chord, whether you lump in the 7 or whether you exclude the 7. But afterwards we do resolve to 1, B, D, G, and G. That's our tonic triad in first inversion. This C is a non-chord tone, this E is a non-chord tone, this C is a non-chord tone, this B is a chord tone, so we'll leave it. And then if we take the aggregate of all of our non-chord tones, we have C, C, G, and E, which is like a 4 chord. That takes us to 5. D, A, D, and F sharp, that's D major, and then we cadence on G major, G, B, D, and G, tonic triad root position. Okay, looking ahead, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of A minor, so we're looking for a point that we modulate to A minor, and I reckon it happens somewhere around here at the beginning of the phrase because of G sharp and F natural. The G sharp would be enough, but the F natural also just sort of seals the deal. We start the phrase off with G major, G, B, D, and G, no need to reanalyze. Passing tone in the alto, and then we get D, A, F sharp, and A, which is our 5 chord, D major, and coincidentally I think this is also where we go to the key of A minor. It is now our 4 chord, and we have, as you can see here, ascending melodic minor, F sharp, G sharp, and A, so that is a telltale sign that we are moving to whatever key is at the end of this melodic minor fragment, and here happens to be A. So afterwards we would expect some type of dominant chord. This D is a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it, and here we get C, D, G sharp, and B. I reckon this C is an accented non-chord tone, just kind of creating a tense moment here between the D and the C. But B is actually our chord tone here. B, D, G sharp, and B spells G sharp diminished over B, which is 7, 6, 4 going to 7, very normative progression, and we would expect our tonic after that, A, E, A, and C, exactly what we get, A minor. And here we have F and A as well happening, so A, F, A, and C. It's a little bit like a passing 6, 6 chord. 2 of the voices are moving, granted one is just jumping an octave, but still I don't think it matters too much because it kind of smooths the transition between one and the next chord, which is a little interesting. We have G, F, D, and B. Now if we look literally on the beat, we have 7, 7, G, 7, which would be a subtonic 7th chord. And it's kind of interesting to see subtonic 7th used in this context. I think there's also an argument that there might be a minor dominant happening here, G, E, E, and B. So whether you see this as 7-7 or minor 5-6, I think it's just a byproduct of the fact that we have passing tones going on in a descending fashion in a minor context, because Bach seldom uses the leading tone and the raised 6th scale degree going down in series. He usually goes natural pitch collection going down and raised pitch collection going up. So whether you see this as a 7-7 chord or a minor 5 chord in first inversion, I suppose it would make more sense for this to be minor 5 in the sense that F would be a 7-6 suspension over the bass, but minor 5 is a relatively rare chord, so that kind of subverts that logic there. But either way, we did see a passing minor 5 chord earlier. Maybe this is just a passing minor 5 chord, but 7 going to 5 is not a very normative progression. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading into it too much, but honestly, I think this is more of a 7 chord. I saw this as 1-6-7, and then some transitive harmony on the other side of the 7 chord, or whatever chord is going on here. It's definitely ambiguous. F, E, A, and A spells, I guess, some type of F major 7 chord, but I reckon this E is not our chord tone. It's actually this D here, and as we get close to the cadence, we have counterpoint like we typically would expect. D, F, A, and A, I think, is what's really being implied here, which would be 4-6. This C is a non-chord tone, this E is a non-chord tone, this A is a chord tone, and this B is a non-chord tone as well. But if we look at everything that's going on here, we have C, E, A, and C, which would be A minor over C, which would be, sorry, not 2-6. We are in the key of A minor, not G major anymore. So that would be like a 1-6 chord. And then we get taken to D, F, A, and B, which is B minor 7 flat 5 over D. Bach loves 2-6-5 chords in cadential situations. And then this E is a non-chord tone, this E and this D are non-chord tones, this G sharp is a non-chord tone. We have like this passing pre-final cadential chord, 5 E major, E, E, G sharp, and B. And I have this marked as a 5-7 for the same reason that I marked, where is it? Right here, like this is a 5-4-3 chord, because over a 16th note, it really does feel like both of the tones that occur over this very short period of time are relevant to the chord, in the same way that it's being presented here. We have the root of the chord and the chordal 7th, so you could also analyze this as 5 if you would like to. And of course we cadence on A minor, A, C, E, and A. Tonic triad, root, position. So moving forward, we're hearkening back to the beginning of the chorale. Like, it's basically just our A section again. Not literally, but you'll see the similarities between them. We have another half cadence in the key of E minor, but that's not reached until we go to the key of G major first. So this A minor chord is also 2 in the key of G major. And we have F sharp, A, D, and A, which is D major in first inversion, 5-6, and then we get G major, G, G, D, and B, tonic triad root position. Passing 7th in the bass, then we have E, G, G, and C. That's C major in first inversion, 4-6, passing tone in the tenor here before we get a pretty interesting chord, and this marks the, really, because we're moving to the key of E minor, any of these places could be points in which we move to the key of E minor. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. And you know what? I think actually no, I'm just going to go with the analysis I have on the page. We have G sharp here, which is not something that actually is indicative of E minor. In fact, it's indicative of the parallel. It's more indicative of E major. So when we have B, D, F, in B, I suppose you could analyze this as B minor, which would be a 3 chord, but I think this F sharp's actually an accented non-chord tone, and it's this G sharp here that we're looking at, G sharp, B, B, and D, which is a secondary dominant. That would be 7/6 of 2, because A minor is the 2 in the key of G major, and G sharp is its leading tone, so 7/6 of 2. And that takes us to 2/6, C, E, A, and C. And when we see a 2/6 chord, we would expect something cadential afterwards, but not in this context because we're moving to the key of E minor. And in fact, I do think this is where we move to the key of E minor. This is now our 4/6 chord. So unlike the first time we modulate to the key of E minor over this 2 chord, or it's not over this 2 chord because we have reason to believe that there's like a deceptive progression going on here. There isn't really enough context to say that there's a 5 chord going on as well, but we do have 4/6 connected to 1, and there's always this bridged 7th scaled degree connecting the 6 of the scale and the tonic of the scale. So that is kind of a giveaway for me, thinking that we're in the key of E rather than we are still in the key of G here. At least that's my thought process. But after our 4/6 chord, we go to C, E, G, and E, E, G, and B. That's E minor in root position, our tonic triad. And we have this passing B minor chord again, D, B, F sharp, and B. So this passing minor 5 chord. Just because it happens twice, I feel like it's somewhat significant, and actually the chords are spelled the exact same, so it feels more pertinent to the texture than a one-off minor 5 chord that might just happen coincidentally. But after our 5/6 chord, we get, like you would expect at the end of our first phrase, C, C, E, and A. That's A minor in first inversion, which is a 4/6 chord, and then we cadence on 5, B, F sharp, D sharp, and B. And you might be ahead of me here, but that would make this another Phrygian half cadence. So we're seeing some symmetry between the A and the B section here, making this form probably like more along the rounded binary side of things rather than the balanced binary. No, it would be on the balanced binary side of things rather than the rounded binary side of things. Afterwards, we are going to get our perfect authentic cadence in the key of G. We're looking for a point in which we modulate, and here is a very interesting point in which we modulate back to the key of G. So if we look on the downbeat, we have E minor, E, G, B, and G. This is exactly where we modulated to the key of G major beforehand, right? This is our tonic triad in the key of E minor. But what's this C sharp doing here? Well, it's a passing tone, and I do think we are modulating in the same way back to the key of G minor. 6 is our way out. It very easily could have been our way in too, but it just seems like this 4/6 to 1 progression is too linked to a particular key for me to feel like the modulation happens here, but it could happen over the E minor chord. G and E share a pitch collection, so modulation zones are typically common because there are so many shared chords between parallel keys, relative keys. But here, this C sharp I think is actually the more interesting tone, because what we have on the other side of this 6 chord is D major, D, F sharp, D, and A, which is a 5 chord. Now I don't think one note moving typically warrants a chord progression, so I think this is an instance where Bach is playing with the introduction of a new pitch to change the structure of the chord, and Bach has done this with chords where he tonicizes 2 and then 2 turns into the leading tone chord of the key that we're moving into. I think this is exactly what Bach is doing here, but this chord is not functioning as a primary leading tone chord, but rather a secondary leading tone chord, making it 7/6 of 5, because C sharp, E, and G is a C sharp diminished chord, and that is the leading tone chord of D, and D is our 5 chord. So I think 6 and 7/6 of 5 are coexisting here, but I think when only one voice is moving, I don't really think a chord progression is occurring, at least in this context. It just doesn't feel like there is a new chord Well, I mean, actually, this is a testament to the fact that maybe moving one voice can constitute a chord progression, because yes, the difference between these two chords is a whole step, right? C sharp versus B, but it's the rest of the voices are static, so it doesn't really feel like there is a progression. It just feels like there's a shifting of perspective, which is why I'm hesitant to mark one or even two voices being moved as a chord progression in a lot of cases, unless the context is right. So I feel like Bach very well could be I feel like Bach is modulating over E minor here, but very quickly he shifts the focus to C sharp being the interesting tidbit of this chord. It's actually more than just a tidbit. It is, I think, the primary focus of this chord. But yes, this is an instance of Bach changing perspectives over one pitch. So after our 5 chord, we have D sharp, B, F sharp, and B, which is B major over D sharp. Tonicizing E minor right after we come from the key of E minor made me feel like we are still in the key of E minor up until this point, and it's quite possible that we are, but I feel like with this tonicization of D major, it really just felt like we were moving to the key of G, and the melody really clearly spells out G major as well. G, A, B feels like 1, 2, 3 rather than, what would it be, 3, 4, 5 in the key of E minor, just how it sounds to me. We have a passing 7th in the tenor as well, but instead of going to E minor, we get E, G, E, and C. So this is an example of a secondary deceptive progression. This would be the equivalent of saying 5, 6 going to 6 in E minor terms, but here we have a secondary dominant not being resolved where we expect. Now, E, G, and E are all tones that are in the key or in the E minor chord, but the C is what creates that deception. So this actually would be 4, 6 in the key of G major. Passing tones in the outer voices as well. The passing tone in the melody is a passing 7th. Then we get C, G, E, and A, similar to our second phrase, I believe, where we have 2. No, am I crazy? I think I might be crazy. I felt like we saw this before. No, let me analyze a little. Yeah, no, we did see it before. 4, 6 going to 2. So it'd be a 2, 6, 5 chord. C, G, E, and A, that's A minor 7 over C. Bach loves 2, 6, 5 chords, and this is a little bit earlier than we would expect it. Same thing here, but we do have A, which is a chord tone, F sharp, D, and C, and A. It's basically the exact same chord going on here, except the alto is singing the tenor part, and the tenor is singing an octave below the alto, but for all intents and purposes, it's the same thing going on here. It's what I call the 5-4-3 chord that you might call a 5-6-4 chord, depending on how you view this C natural. That lasts all of 1/4 of a beat. But afterwards, we do go to 1, B, D, G, and G, tonic triad, G major, first inversion. C is a non-chord tone, C is a non-chord tone, E is a non-chord tone, leaving us with a 4 chord, C, C, G, and E. So we're seeing a very similar cadence to how we ended our A section. We then have D, A, D, and F sharp. That's our 5 chord, D major, and then we cadence on G, G, B, D, and G, our tonic triad in root position, and that is today's analysis. All in all, I think the big takeaways from this are, number one, the shifting of the perspective, the power that one note being, or one voice being moved has on the impact on the rest of the chord. A lot of times passing tones are just benign and don't impact the function of a chord, but here we have a clear change or potential change in function of the chord here. This C sharp could just purely be a like a modulation, not modulation, tonicization junior, where the C sharp is just bringing a little bit of emphasis to D. But clearly Bach is moving towards the idea of G major over this point, and C sharp is bringing emphasis to G major's dominant. So E minor versus C sharp diminished, they're close chords. In fact, you can call this whole chord a C sharp minor 7 flat 5 chord if you wanted to lump this B and C sharp together. But I feel this is a case where the context of the chord is just being shifted due to one note being introduced. Same thing here, right? It's like we could have a B minor chord analyzed, or we could have G sharp diminished. But here, we're not being pressed with the idea of modulation going on. Potentially we do, but I don't think there's a modulation to E minor going on over a secondary dominant. I think the secondary dominant would establish first. And I would make that argument for this too if we weren't moving to D, which is the subtonic seventh of the scale. But granted, there is a chromatic bass line going on here, so it could contribute to that being an unusual progression, because chromatic bass lines where they're moving by half steps either up or down in the bass typically lead to unusual chord progressions, and we have an unusual progression here. So either way, that's today's analysis. The 7 chord is interesting as well, passing minor 5 chords. A couple of unusual chords, but for all intents and purposes, relatively straightforward. If you're interested in following me along on the journey to analyze all of Bach's chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Feel free to hit the notification icon as well so you get notified of my daily upload, and make sure you like the video. If you liked the video, it means that my content will be seen by more people, and that means more discussion and more analysis, and that's the type of thing we like around here. But with all of that being said, thank you so much for watching this video and supporting the channel by doing so. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.